The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
We welcome you to this webinar about the generic layout editor in QINSy. This webinar is organized in order to introduce the possibilities of the generic layout editor in QINSy to you. How to participate today? Please test your audio. Use the orange button to hide your panel. Use the full screen button to use the entire screen for the presentation. Use the raise hand button after the session when you have a question. During the session, you can submit your question in the questions box. We will collect and summarize the questions and will answer them after the session. I'm the presenter of today's webinar. My name is QINSy. Rob Lene is the sidekick. He's the software engineer who designed the generic layout editor. And the technical staff are Ebeline van de Velde and Wilco Dijkstra. The presentation will take approximately 30 minutes. This doesn't include the time for answering questions. We will use another 30 minutes for answering your questions. This will be done after the presentation. Please feel free to go when the presentation is finished, but the webinar will be open for another 30 minutes for further discussion. If you have a question, please submit your question in the questions box. You can find the questions box in the panel. This can be done during the session, but we will answer your question after the presentation. In case you want to use the microphone for direct contact with the technical staff, please raise your hand so we can enable you to speak. This can be done when the presentation is finished. Questions will be answered after the presentation. Within a few days after the session, we will put the questions and answers on our website. And an email with questions and answers will be sent to all participants within a few days. In case you have a question after the webinar is closed, please send us your question by email or visit our website for the frequently asked questions. You can also reach us by phone or on Skype. The Skype address shown here is for our office in Holland and can be used during office hours in Holland. Please see here for the contact details. Now back to today's program. In this session, I will present the generic layout editor to you. All items that are available in QINSy can be selected in the generic layout editor. These items can be used to output to a different system. They can be shown in your own size, color or format in a display. You can create log files directly created online, or you can create export files. Export is done from a recorded database. When you press F1 in the generic layout editor, the online help will start. On the QINSy website, you will find generic items under the driver's manual. I will show you now. As you can see, tips and tricks can be found here. Specific settings about the different layout purposes. So if I go to Overview, you can find all the specific settings for the different layouts. And you can find information about each separate item that can be selected. So for instance, I go to Raw Data, Single Beam Echo Sounder, And you will see a list with a description for each individual sub-item that can be chosen for the item echo sounder. You can also find a movie about how to export your vessel track to Google Earth. If there's time left over at the end of the webinar, I will show it. Otherwise, just have a look yourself when you're interested. You need a login and a password to access the information on the website. They are shown now. Two examples of generic displays are shown now. As you can see, you can create items in your own color, own size, etc. And you can create as many different displays as you want. Now I will start my presentation. During this webinar, I will show some of the possibilities of the generic layout editor. I will start by showing a display. In the QINSy controller, I open the display manager. And I add a new display. I give the display a name. And as a type, I select generic display. I press the first icon to go to the layout editor. The name I just entered is shown here, and you have to make sure that the appropriate template is selected. The generic layout editor needs to have a template database or recorded database selected, because it depends on the database which items can be selected. For instance, multi-beam items can only be selected when a multi-beam system is added to the database. Then, display-specific items can be changed. For instance, the background color, font, update mode, etc. That can be done over here. I change the background color to white, over here, and the font color to black. Here you can see an example of how the display will look like. If I select properties, and then defaults, I can change these specific display settings as well. If I would change them here, so for instance, if I change the background and font color here, next time when I create a new display, it will start with these settings. If you would choose a different output, for instance log files, the first page, so this page will be different. Specific settings for each output can be selected. So the settings here will be different. However, all the pages after this, where the items are selected, over here, they are exactly the same. All items that are calculated or stored in QINSy can be selected with this wizard. The only exception is footprint data. During this webinar, I will show some of them. There's not enough time to show all options. When you have time, go through the wizard and have a look what's possible. The main parts of the wizard are setup data, general data, raw data, and result data. They are in a logical order. Under setup data, All settings from the template database can be selected. General data and information about the geodetic settings, about the objects, and about the fixed notice. Under general data, you can find general information like date and time, information about the lines, information about fixes, survey statistics, or system info. Under raw data, the raw data that comes in from the systems online can be selected. It's only possible to select systems that are available in the selected database. And finally, at result data, all the data that's calculated anywhere in QINSy can be selected. For instance, information about the computation, about the nodes, line offsets, height aiding, tide results, etc., etc. Now I will start selecting some items. I will start with selecting the name of my vessel. I go to Setup Data and Objects. First, I have to select the parent item, because it's possible to have multiple objects in the database. I press Add, and I select my vessel. The objects that are shown now, the vessel and the ROV, are the objects that are defined in the selected template database. So I select my vessel. All available sub-items for this parent item are shown. If the selected sub-item list is still empty, by right-clicking with your mouse button, I will do that now, and selecting Add All Items, all sub-items can be selected at once. This can be done for all parent items. I will remove them now, so I can show how only one item is selected. Remove. If I only want to select one sub-item, I just double-click on it in the sub-item list. So I want the name, and I double-click on it. And each sub-item has its own properties. They can be selected over here. Now, on the general data, I will select the time, fixed number, and fixed time. So I go to General Data, General, and I double-click on the time. It's possible to select the time format and the time zone. Now on the fix info, I select the fixed number and the fixed time. Now I will select some raw data. I will start with the depth for my echo sounder. First I select raw data and I select single beam echo sounder. I have to select my parent item and I select my single beam system. And as sub-item I select the depth by double-clicking on it. Now I will change some properties. When I set the apply C-O to yes, so over here, apply C-O to yes, The depth value will be corrected with the sound velocity scale factor as entered in the database. For systems where a C-O value is entered in the database setup, for instance for a gyro system, this entered C-O value will be added to the raw value. With the operator over here, a value can be added, subtracted, multiplied, etc. to the observation, or a combination of them can be applied to the selected subitem. For this subitem, I will change the size over here and the color over here. And I will use the stale age for this item. The stale age can be found over here. I select 3 seconds for the stale age. And I use a scale color of red. This means that when the observation is more than 3 seconds old, the color will automatically change to red in the display. Now I will add some sub-items for the positioning system. First I select positioning and I press add to select the parent item. And I select the system in my template database where I want to select the sub-item for. So you can see in this template 2 positioning systems are available. All my sub-items I want to see in the same color, so I change the color for the parent item. So I change the color over here, so I don't have to change it for each individual sub-item. And I will select latitude, longitude, height and calc mode as sub-items. So I select the latitude, longitude, height and calc mode. All items are described in the generic items in the drivers and interface manual, in the same order as they are selected in this wizard. So for instance, when it's not clear to you what the calc mode is, the description can be found on the website. I will show you. So on the raw data, and then positioning system, and then all the sub-items are described. And then here you can read what the calc mode means. For the calc mode, I will use the translation option. The calc mode is just one figure coming from the positioning system that represents the mode of the GPS receiver. So instead of seeing just the figure, with the translation, I can translate the figure to the actual mode. So for instance, instead of 5, I would like to see RTK, 4 is deep GPS, 3 is GPS, etc. I will do this now. So I select the translation mode. I press on add to create a translation table. So when my input is 5, I want to see RTK. When the input is 4, the GPS. When the input is 3, GPS. And I use an asterisk. And then I want to see dot do not use. The asterisk means all the other values. So if the value is not 5, 4 or 3, the program will say do not use. Be aware, these figures are different depending on the used positioning system. Read the manual from the manufacturer or the drivers and interface manual from QINSy to find the correct figures. If I right-click with my mouse on the selected parent item, so over here, then I right-click with my mouse, then I can select Copy Item. When I do this, automatically my secondary system has the same properties and sub-items selected as the first one. I only have to change the system. So I change my secondary system to Arster, and now automatically all the items are selected. Have a look yourself once at raw data to see which sub-items can be selected for each type of system. At result data, all the items that are calculated in QINSy can be selected. I will show one example for node results. So at result data and then nodes. Under nodes, many sub-items that have something to do with one of the selected nodes can be selected. These items are used a lot. For instance, the speed overground, course overground, heading, they can all be selected here. If you would select easting and northing over here for a specific node, the values would be the same as in the node QC display. However, in the generic display, they can be shown in your own font, size and color. It's also possible to make a comparison between nodes. I will make a comparison with the same node calculated with two different computations. First, as a parent item, I select my COG node, calculated with computation Trimble, and I will compare it with the same node. So I select the same node again with my other computation. And as sub-items, I select delta easting and delta northing. So delta easting and delta northing. Now I finish selecting the items. When I press Overview, over here, and then Layout, you can see 15 items are selected. Then I press Layout. I can see a list of all the items that are selected. With the Move Up, over here, and Move Down, I can put them in a different order. With the Properties button, or double-clicking on the item, I can change the properties. And with the Layout button, you go back to the layout again. Now I will save the XML file. In the XML file, all settings for this display are stored. So save. I save the XML. And now I close the layout editor. Now the created display is shown. With the scroll wheel of your mouse, you can easily zoom in and out of the display. And when I select an item with my mouse, I can move it inside the display. When I double-click on an item, I can change the properties. For instance, I want to make my echo sound depth more clear. So I double-click on it, and I can change the properties. So I will change the size. I make it bigger, and I will select more properties over here. I select user defined, and then over here I select underline. And now you can see the item is changed. The still age for this item was set to 3 seconds. I will stop the update now so you can see what happens. So now after 3 seconds it became red. For the vessel, I will change the label because now you see the vessel name twice. It's not really necessary. So I double click on it. And over here, display, you can change the label. So now it's showing the parent label in the value, but I only want to see the label in the value. It's also possible to create a user-defined label. It can be done over here, and a lot of different options are available then. It's possible to use the freeze button, the button over here, to put the display on hold. This can be useful for creating a screen capture at a particular time. Don't forget to unfreeze it again. The same items that are selected for the display can be used to create one of the other outputs. I will show you now how to set up a log file. First, I will close the controller. And then I open the generic layout editor from the QINSy console. If the generic layout editor is not in the QINSy console, right-click with your mouse button and use Add and Remove QPS Programs to add it. So I open it now. Now I will create an XML file for log files. So I go to Overview. I can see all my items are still selected, 15 items. And instead of Layout Purpose Display, I will select Layout Purpose Log File. Now over here, you could see different settings. Now you see the log file specific settings. I changed the log mode to recording. I changed the file header to simple, all in one row. And over here it's possible to change the field delimiter, checksum, termination character, etc. This way you can create a file that suits your purposes. If the client asks for a specific format and it's not available as a predefined format in QINSy, it can be created using the generic layout editor. I will save the XML file now for the log files. I can keep it the same name because it's saved in a different directory, in the log file directory of the settings of your QINSy project. The same can be done for an output driver, so layout purpose driver, or for export files. I will close the generic layout editor. If I want to create log files online, I need to add a generic ASCII data logger system in my template database. I will do that now. I go to Setup, and I open my template database. I will add a new system. I give it a name. And as type, I select output system. And as a driver, I select the generic ASCII data logger over here. I set the update rate to 1 second, so the output is once every second. If you want to create an output driver with a generic layout editor, a generic, over here, I've created one already, you should add a generic output user-defined ASCII driver. Now I save the database setup. I exit the template manager. And I go online again. Because I added a generic ASCII data logger to the template database, when I go to Session Setup now, and Storage, you will see a new icon named Log Files. When I select this, I can enable the XML I want to use for creating the log files. And if I want to, I can change some properties. And in the controller, you can see that generic logging is enabled. Now, when I would start recording, log files will be automatically created in the log files directory of the project. When a generic output driver is created in the template database, as I've shown you, automatically a generic output driver window will be available online. It's over here. I press Add, and I select the required XML file. Over here, I select Next. I can change some settings if I want to, and I do Finished. And now the data will be outputted over the selected serial port. And here you can see an example of how it looks like. The last thing I would like to show you is how to create export files. I close the controller. And I go to Replay. A list is seen with the recorded databases in this project. I select the database that I want to export, for instance this one. I select the action menu. From the action menu, I select Export. And I make sure that all data generic export is selected. And I press OK. Now I can see the database that I just selected. I press Next. I select the XML file I want to use for my export. I can change some specific settings again if I want to. I press next and finish. And now an export file will be created. And if I want to, I can immediately view the results. So this is how my export file looks like. Now the presentation is finished. And most of the questions received over the chat will be collected now and will be answered. Please submit your question in the questions box or raise your hand. We will schedule more webinars. Dates and times will be announced on our homepage, or you will receive an invitation when you are on our mailing list. If you want to be added to our mailing list, please send an email to support@qps.nl. Our next webinar will be about side scan processing. And there's also a webinar next month about the workflow going from QINSy to Fledermaus. Thank you very much for joining. Feel free to go now. The webinar will be open for another 30 minutes for questions and discussion. Wilco, are there any questions?
Angelique, no, unfortunately until now we don't have any questions, so anybody who can hear us, feel free to ask your questions now.
Well, in the meantime, I can show you something in the generic display. When I right-click with my mouse button in the generic display, and if I say then reset layout, all the items go back to the original position again. And I can show you as well for that still age. So if I set a still age for the positioning system, 2 seconds, in red over here, and the update stops for my positioning system, you will see that all the sub-items become red. Still no questions?
Correct, Angelique, still no questions from the audience.
Well, we will wait for another 2 minutes or something, and if there are no more questions, we will finish. If you have any questions after the webinar is closed, you can always send us an email to support@QPS, or you can call us, or via Skype. All the contact details are shown now.
Angelique, we'll go.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to say, if there are still no more questions, I said in the beginning, if you have time left over, I could show you that movie about how to create the export of your vessel track to Google Earth. So it can be found on our website if you want to see it again. Well, first you go to QINSy. You select the database that you want to export. You create the export XML. So this is specific export, Google Earth, KML. You select the pen width and the color. You save the created XML file. You can change the trigger if you want to. You export it. You go to Google Earth. And you can see the track you just exported. Wilco, are there any questions in the meantime?
No, still no questions.
Okay, if there are no more questions, we will close the webinar. And in case you still have unanswered questions, please address them to support@qps.nl. And thank you all very much for joining. You can stop the broadcast, Wilco.